All right, welcome back. This is lab 2A, actually an optional lab where we're going to go through route rules and go through that debug tool again from that perspective. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to activate Cloud Shell again, as we need to use it for other things. And while that is loading, I'm already going over to the API proxies. Oh. Just put in proxies. There we go. And we're going to create a new proxy for this purpose. It's going to be a normal reverse proxy. We're going to call it lab2a v1. Oops, what happened? That was not intended. Create reverse proxy lab2a v1 and then change the hyphen to a /. Make a little bit of room here. And then we have the same backend. And then we can just create it. And then we're going to take a look at the development of that. And here we have target endpoints on the left-hand side. There's a plus sign here that allows us to add a new target. And we're going to use the UUID service from http://bin.org. So I'm going to call the endpoint UUID_service, and then we're going to set up the HTTPS URL for that this is usable by anyone, right? So adding that, and now you can see that besides the default endpoint, we also have another endpoint called UUID service. Now, if we look at the default endpoint definition here, we just kind of make a little bit more room here. One of the things that you should be able to see is the route rule. So it's under the proxy endpoints default, this one, sorry. Yeah. So here we have the routing configuration, and there is only one route rule in place. That's the default one that goes to the default target. So we're going to keep that in place, and we're going to create another route rule directly above it, right? And for the UUID service, so I can create a route rule. I'm going to name it UUID, and it needs to be in quotes. And then we create a condition for that, right? So the condition that we want for this route rule is that the path of the incoming request ends with /UUID. Right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. And if this condition is met, then we want the target endpoint to be the UUID service, the one that we just created, right? So that's how that's defined. And then we close the route rule. Oh. Like that. All right. So these route rules are evaluated top to bottom. So we'll first take a look at the path suffix. If the path ends with UUID, then the UUID service is going to be used, and then otherwise the default target endpoint is going to be used. So let's save this. There we go. And then we can deploy this, and let's deploy it into the eval environment. We don't actually have any others available currently. Now, as we know, this takes a while to deploy, so let's just wait for that to happen. Okay, great. That has now been deployed. So let's test it out. Let's use the curl command to get categories. So this is the same command we used previously with the example backend. And you can see that it is returning these list of categories as normally. So now the reason for this is that the URL ended with categories, right? So it uses the default target endpoint for that. Now, if we change our URL to end with, that's weird, to end with UUID instead, right? So like this. So same prefix, map to a v1, but then we ask for UUID instead. This should go to the other backend service. However, it is returning an error, a 404 error. So maybe we need to figure out what's going on in here. So let's do that. So let's go over to the debug pane and then start a debug session in our eval environment. Okay, cool. And then let's retry that URL and get the same error. And you can see it shows up here, gives us a 404. Now let's open that up, make a little bit of room in here. And let's take a look at what we're getting here, right? So we're starting off with the request itself coming in. Nothing weird here, right? This is curl. It's asking for a specific URL. Everything looks okay. This is the URI. Then we do the flows on it. Nothing weird happening here. You can see that there's a conditional route. Proxy path suffix equals UUID. That is actually true. So that means that we go to a specific target, and that target needs to be the UUID target. That has backend. The request is sent to that backend. And the response that comes back is a 404. Okay. So, why is that? So unfortunately, in the request sent part, we can't actually see the URI that was used. And the response is just going to be this 404. However, in the analytics part, if we go onwards to analytics, here we can actually see the URI that was used for the backend request. And you can see over here that is UUID, UUID. So what's happening here is instead of requesting http bin.org/UUID, we're actually appending what we got in the request, where the path suffix was UUID, to the backend request again. And then that basically means that we have a URI of 2 UUIDs. Now, what we could do is basically we could go back to developing and then change the target endpoint, or actually the, sorry, okay. We would need to go to the target endpoint and change its definition, remove the UUID from here, right? So that way the UUID that comes in with the request will just be appended to http bin.org, and then everything would work. However, we're not going to do that because in real life, things might not be that simple, right? You might have a totally different path suffix in your API compared to what the backend is requiring or expecting. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to edit the request, okay? I'm going to do this in the preflow of this UUID service, right? So as soon as the routing rule has been evaluated and the UUID service has been identified as the proper target endpoint, then the preflow of this UUID service is going to be run. And this is the default code here. There's nothing here, right? It's totally empty. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a step to the request preflow, and kind of we could either do that manually here, right? So we could add that into the preflow of the request. So kind of this element here, or we can do it graphically. So you can see the request and the preflow, and then there's this plus sign for adding a policy step. This gives us a wizard. And what we can do here is basically what we want to do is create a JavaScript policy to edit the path suffix. All of the different policy types are available here, so the built-in policies. We'll be talking more about them later. And then in addition to that, those ones, we can also have our custom policies, and one of them is the JavaScript policy. Note that the name is by default prefixed by JS. That kind of helps you understand the type of policy by just looking at its name. So JS stands for JavaScript. And we're going to call it the JS disable path suffix copy policy. We're going to create a new JavaScript file for this, and then maybe call it something nicer, like disable path suffix copy. All right. And then we add this. So you can see it's here now in the preflow. We can also see it here in the XML. So now the request element, instead of being empty, has a step in it that is called JS path suffix copy. And if we open this up, we can see that we have a resource here called disable path suffix copy.js, and then this policy referring to it. Now we could just write our code here into this JavaScript file, but as it happens, we can actually run this inline in the policy itself. So it's just a small amount of code, so we can just add it directly into this one. So let's just say continue our time limit and name is correct, and then instead of referring to the file itself, let's just say source, and then say context. The context object is where we can find all of the references to variables that are in Apigee. And what we're going to do is we're going to set a variable. So the variables are both readable and writable from JavaScript. And the one that we want to set is the target copy path suffix. And we want to make it false. So what this does is when this is a setting, first of all, and then what it does is that when we are building the request for the backend service, we're not copying the path suffix from the incoming request to that backend outgoing request. That's all we need, right? So normally would you probably want to put this into a JavaScript file, but for our purposes this is a single line, so it's okay to put into the configuration itself. And that basically means that we don't need this JavaScript file here at all. So we can delete the resource. I think we have to do it somewhere here. No. Is there a right click? No. Man, this is so small. I think it's here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. Delete the resource. Cool. Okay, so now we're rid of that JavaScript file, and but still have the policy file, the XML file in place. So we can save that. There's going to be a new revision of the API, and then we can deploy it. And let's just wait for that to happen. Okay, so the new version has been deployed. So let's start a debug session. And actually, let's delete the debug session. And let me show you something else, right? So one of the things that we can do is we can start a debug session, and then we can set up a filter. So it could be based on the path or anything else, or we can just basically use any custom filter in here. And what we would be interested in here is, for example, the proxy path suffix. It doesn't exist in there, but we know that it exists in the request data. And let's say that we're only interested in the calls that go to this UUID service. Right, so we've created that. And then let's do a request. So we're calling the UUID service here, and we can get a UUID back. That's great. Let's also call the other service, sorry, the categories, and we can see that's working as well, right? So we're using two different target endpoints here. And now I requested the categories a couple of times and the UUID once. And you can see that the filter here is working. So we only get one request in the debugger. And that request is to the UUID endpoint. Right? See it here? That's the UUID endpoint. Another thing we can see here is that we have now this JavaScript step in here. It has been launched. And then in this step, we should be able to see that the target copy path has been set to false. Okay, so that's how that works. Fairly short lab in this time. Thanks a lot for listening, and see you in the next one. Till then.